Coming up on This Week in Space, a Soviet Venus probe is crashing back to Earth. NASA's Roman Space Telescope is coming together, but is it going to fly? And Charles Slatkin, the primo cheerleader of Robert Goddard, is going to tell us why the father of American rocketry is so important then, now, and in the future. So tune in.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is This Week in Space, episode number 160, recorded on May 9th, 2025, The Amazing Dr. Goddard. Hello and welcome to yet another episode of This Week in Space, The Amazing Dr. Goddard edition. I'm Rod Pyle, Editor-in-Chief of Ad Astra Magazine. I'm joined, as always, by my fellow non-mathematician, Tarek Malik, who is the Editor-in-Chief at the one, the only, the amazing Space.com. Hi, partner.
I'm doing well. How are you doing? Oh, wait, you didn't ask me how I'm doing. How are you doing?
But now that you said it, I'm so glad to hear that. Well, I'm okay. I'm okay. And I'm going to be more okay in a few minutes when we're joined by Charles Slatkin.
That's right.
Who, this is still really kind of gets me. He bought Robert Goddard's house in Worcester, Massachusetts, because it was otherwise going to probably be torn down or mistreated in some way. And he's preserving it, turning it into a museum, and has sort of just taken on the mission of continuing to kindle the interest in Robert Goddard, in the history of rocketry, the father of rocketry in the United States, and a larger mission to inspire and support STEM education in the United States, which is always a good thing. So we're going to be with him in just a few minutes, and that's really going to be fun, and he's a heck of a guy. Before we start, don't forget, put it in your head, to do us a solid, make sure to like, subscribe, and do the other nice podcast things wherever you happen to listen to this podcast, because we're counting on you to keep the warm electrons flowing your way. And now, in complete contravention of keeping the electrons flowing your way, because this will result in probably a cooler moment, a space joke from Paul Woolley.
Paul! Yes, Rod.
What do astronauts do immediately after landing on Mars?
I don't know. What do they do?
They post a selfie and wait 8 minutes for the likes to arrive. Wah, 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 wah.
If they're like me, they're going to be waiting a long time, sadly. So I don't get a lot of likes.
I mean, but my Waterloo is, even if I do this on Earth, I'll be waiting a long time. But that's
wait. Have we talked about that joke before? Because
it felt familiar, and I thought
it would take. It would take 16 minutes because it's the 8 minutes to get there.
No, it's between 5-ish and 23, depending on where Mars is in its orbit. Remember the orbits. See, this is why you and I are writers. So Mars and Earth are on similar tracks in the race, but Earth catches up and then departs, and Mars slings along by. So yeah,
I guess is that my 7 minutes of terror waiting for the likes to come in from Mars, right? Is that what that is?
No, that's entry time. We're going to have a talk and a spanking after this is over.
Yeah.
But I've heard that some people want to send us to Mars when it's joke time in this show, and won't that be disappointing? But you can help. Send us your best, worst, or most indifferent space joke at twist@twit.tv. Now, from the darkness of our space joke to the bright moment of headlines with Tarek, we're going to talk about today's incoming Soviet Venus probe. Wow!
Yeah. Well,
now, if you're going to have space junk getting ready to re-enter, isn't it comforting to know that it's already been hardened and designed to re-enter through Venus's thicker atmosphere? Oh, joy.
I want to just pause for a minute and say that I was getting ready to do the bop to the jingle for headline news, and we skipped totally over it. So, I thought we were going to go do like the little headline news. So everyone,
it's not too late.
Headline news.
Oh, I missed it now. So, all right. Yeah, we're starting off with a bang or a headline news. I did it. No, we are starting off with a bang, or at least a brilliant blaze of glory, because a failed Soviet Venus lander is coming back home. Cosmos 42 is coming back. Actually, as we're recording this, like hours away from burning up. We've been following this basically since it became apparent that it was going to re-enter around this month as we're recording it. And today is May 9th. And as of right now, as of 3 p.m., which is what time it is right now as we're recording this.
Eastern time.
Eastern time. The European Space Agency thinks that the Cosmos 42 Venus probe is going to burn up, I think, over the ocean. It looks like it might be over the Pacific off the coast of, no, the Indian Ocean off the coast of Australia, if I'm looking at this map right, very early in the morning on the weekend. So its days are numbered. This is a spacecraft launched in 1972 by the Soviet Union to land on the surface of Venus. It didn't actually reach Venus. Obviously, it suffered an anomaly, got stuck in a very long elliptical orbit, and it's been there for like 50 decades. And
orbit of Earth,
what goes up must come down, and that orbit has decayed around Earth to the point that it is now falling back and re-entering. And that what you kind of teed up at the beginning is the fact that unlike every other spacecraft that has burned up, like satellite that has burned up in the atmosphere, this one is actually designed to land. It was designed to land in the thick atmosphere of Venus, which means that there could be a good amount of this nearly it's about a half ton, just over a half ton, 1,190 pounds, 495 kilograms, could survive the reentry itself. So we do want to know where it lands, and ESA's tracking it. The Aerospace Corporation is checking it. You can bet that the Space Command is tracking it as well to see where it is and where it might come down.
That would make a big dent in my roof.
It would. It would. It's a plot of 6 feet under too. I think that the main star in that that show was killed by the toilet from Mir because when it re-entered. I think that's how that show opened up. Yeah, and then she became like an agent of death or whatever.
That's brings a whole new meaning to potty training. All right. Moving on, a key portion of NASA's Nancy Roman Space Telescope clears thermal vacuum test, but will it fly?
That's the question, right? We talked a little bit about the Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope recently because it was on the list of potential cancellations from the skinny budget that the Trump administration recently released. But the hardware, as we said in that episode, is actually built. In fact, it's almost complete, which is what NASA's announcement this week revealed. I mean, basically the space telescope is the outer barrel and its deployable aperture cover and the test. They all passed a deploy test in a thermal chamber at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. Goddard, very apropos for our episode today.
Yes, sir.
And so it really sets up the stage for NASA to attach the final flight solar array sun shields and the outer barrel that they call it to put on top of it. So they're going to start that final assembly in Goddard this month. So,
excuse me, I just have to say, can you imagine what it's like to be starting final assembly on something that, as far as you could tell, is going to be canceled and probably torn apart and scavenged?
I hope that's not going to be the case, though. I find it really difficult to believe that this mission is going to be canceled just because, like, the administration feels like they have tried to do this before, right? Yeah. They tried to do it with James Webb. No, James Webb is doing groundbreaking science in space. They tried to cancel it, right? Even though it was mostly built because it was so far over budget, and yet it survived. They tried to do it with
what survived? Viper?
No. James Webb. They tried to do it with AMS as well because it was too expensive and they didn't want to have the extra space shuttle mission to do it. And they were able to get that through and get more support for it and get the mission funded through Congress. I'm sure they're going to find a way to preserve a space telescope that NASA got for free. We talked to John Grunsfeld on our recent episode. They got the optics assembly for free from the NRO and built a world-class science tool around it. I think they're going to find a way. I think Jared Isaacman's going to get confirmed, come in and say, we need this science. So
does confirmation Jared Isaacman? Yeah. I hope that works. There's a lot to say about that, but we have to move on because we have a fascinating. good Scott Kelly story called "Good Nights," and I leave it to you, partner.
Yeah, this one comes from by the way, the Venus story obviously came from the space.com team that's tracking it. The Nancy Grace Roman, that's from NASA. This one is from my friend Robert Perlman at Collect Space, who basically found out that astronaut Scott Kelly, famous half of the Kelly twin astronauts, and the 1 year mission astronaut, has teamed up with Goodnights, the diaper company, to try to help destigmatize bedwetting. It's a campaign that launched on National Astronaut Day, which was May 8th, May 7th, May 6th, May 5th. May 5th is what it was. That's right. It's the Alan Shepard launch day. And basically it's a campaign with him and like a young child, reminding people that while we all wore diapers when we were little, astronauts wear diapers right now in space, on spacewalks, when they launch, all of that thing. And so that it's nothing to be embarrassed about. And it's something that is, it is endorsed by space exploration and whatnot. And so it's a kind of a fun, tongue-in-cheek way, I think, for astronauts to try to at least give kids something more to identify with, and take something that could be embarrassing and say, hey, man, it's happened to astronauts in space. Alan Shepard famously had to use the restroom on his first flight in 1961, and now they all wear diapers in their spacesuits.
Well, I'm embracing an impressive moment of maturity here because I got nothing more to say about that, except that we'll be back in just a few moments with Charles Slatkin to talk about Dr. Robert Goddard. So stay with us. And we are back with Charles Slatkin. And Charles, I'm not quite sure how to introduce you because you have a panoply of projects going, the Wonder Project, the Goddard Centennial, the museum. How would you like to be introduced? I'll let you do your own today.
Gee, good question.
Yeah.
I love space. Space made me a positive, hopeful person, and I've been working most recently to try to make sure that my kids and my grandkids and kids everywhere have that same feeling of hopefulness that anything is possible. So basically try to do a number of initiatives that really promote that feeling and the wonder and awe of space.
Wow, Tarek, he's a space optimist. What happened to you?
What?
Well, I should have blamed myself, but I don't want to take the spears and arrows all the time. So, okay, well, that's wonderful. So, Tarek, of course, you have a question.
I do, Charles. I ask everyone a very similar question, and I'm very curious about your own journey too, because Rod and I were bit by the space bug when we were little space reporters way back when, and I'm curious when that passion that you just explained about being interested in space, being driven by it, really took hold. Is it something that was kindled when you were young, like a lot of folks, like Rod and I, or is it something that you discovered later on, either in university or professional life? Take us through that journey, your journey to space, if you will.
Very, very early. I think I'm 5 years old, and my father was telling me about Sputnik. So 1957. And 2 years later, we're watching the Wonderful World of Disney, and Wernher von Braun is showing his vision of how we're going to get to the moon in 10 years. And it seemed impossible, and yet 10 years later, we landed on the moon. So certainly watching the space race was very inspiring for a young kid. And going to the great World's Fairs. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, before it was cool, and got to take a bus to the New York World's Fair every weekend. And it was a time.
Oh, wow.
It was a time when the world was really in tough shape. We were doing duck and cover in elementary school. There were race riots, terrible poverty. Our leaders were being assassinated, and yet the World's Fairs promoted this vision of a future, enabled by technology, basically colonies on the moon and farms underneath the planets. And it really started me on a journey of just feeling like technology and all these brilliant people that enable technology could make the world a better place.
So I just want to touch back, and frequent listeners, forgive me because I've talked about this before, but I was born in 56, so I saw the Disney stuff, in second or third run. But I recall and have since confirmed there was the animated version, and then there was that really fascinating live action version of, Man Conquers Space. The live action version, if you recall, and this was the same one they ran at Disneyland for the Journey to the Moon ride. I love the fact that you've got, all these 6 military guys or 4, whatever it was, in the rocket, and they're all wearing helmets with great big video visors on the top and aerials out the side and all that. And the microphone they pick up is about the size of a ham hock when they're talking to mission control. But they're coming around the backside of the moon. They're firing flares. Do you remember this? They're firing flares down so they can illuminate the surface. And the final flare before they come around the limb of the moon and could see the Earth again to communicate, the flare's flickering out, and you see the outlines of a rectilinear wall on the moon. So clearly somebody's been down there building something. And they cut back to the 2 spacemen, and they look at each other and go, there's just this kind of silent nod, and then they come back around the moon. They're like, hey, mission control, nothing to report. I always thought that was a brilliant little bit only Disney, right? Anyway, yeah, that was an incredible introduction. And you and I came around about the same time. And what a time to be alive. 2 reasons. 1, we got to see a lot of amazing things happen. But 2, back before the mid-'60s, we really didn't know how awful space was. We still thought that a lot of the planets might be kind of Earth-like, Mars, you might be able to breathe with just an oxygen tank like Robinson Crusoe on Mars. Venus, it's probably hot and swampy, but you could still walk around in your waiter boots. And how hard can it be? And then suddenly, the mid-'60s, we start sending out those interplanetary robots, and it turns out, these places are horrible, and it's really hard. And so we've been fighting that battle of reality ever since. Do you remember the shift from the kind solar system to the angry one?
Not really. That doesn't click. I think I missed.
It's like a pessimistic view of the solar system there, Rod. It's like, welcome to this big podcast about space. By the way, space is awful.
Okay, whenever you're done. No, I'm just talking about, specifically, I think it was Mariner 4. That moment when the first pictures came back, we expected maybe, there was this wave of darkening that we thought might be a forest or at least algae or something. Ooh, canals would be cool. Right. And we got craters and bleakness. Anyway, enough of my darkness. Yeah. Let's talk about, before we get into your ventures, could you give us a primer for people who may not know who Robert Goddard was and why he's so important?
So Robert Goddard was born in 1882 and fired the world's first liquid propulsion rocket in 1926. Somehow, 43 years later, we walked on the moon. And if that doesn't make you believe that anything's possible, certainly nothing does. And yet his story is full of all these wonderful, interesting connections with Buzz Aldrin, with Carl Sagan, with Charles Lindbergh and Harry Guggenheim. And he was mocked by folks like the New York Times when he wrote his first article before he even attempted to build a liquid propulsion rocket. The New York Times wrote this scathing article that Dr. Goddard, despite his chair of physics, doesn't know the most basic fundamentals of science, that you can't have propulsion in a vacuum. And 2 days before they landed on the moon, they printed this tiny little retraction in the New York Times.
Finally.
Yeah. But what impressed me the most, and one thing I'm trying to share with especially young people these days, is how amazingly persistent he was, and how he persevered despite mostly failing and being mocked by folks like the New York Times. And those characteristics, that Yankee ingenuity and that perseverance, never got to see the moon landing. His wife Esther did, fortunately. Really are just these wonderful characteristics that I think, should, so many of our modern Goddards really do demonstrate it, almost every day. But he was this fabulous early scientist. He had a vision of going to Mars and beyond when he was 17 years old, in a famous cherry tree story. If we have time, we'll talk about that. But what I've learned over the years, I'm not really a historian person, I'm more of a futurist, is he was incredible visionary. He was writing about ion propulsion, collecting solar energy in space and beaming it down to Earth to power terrestrial cities, an early prototype of what he called the vacuum train, which is the modern personification of the Hyperloop. And he even predicted the technology that spin launch is using to attempt to get projectiles into low Earth orbit, et cetera. So he was just so far ahead of his time, and yet what I think drives myself and many of my colleagues forward is so many people outside of the aerospace community don't know who he is. And we all know who Thomas Edison, and every kid knows who Thomas Edison and Graham Bell is, but we really don't know who this guy, Robert Goddard, is. And I travel the country and ask young people and old people everywhere, and I'm shocked how 95% of the folks don't know the father of modern rocketry.
And I think that may be increasing in the last 5 or 10 years. And of course, famously also a pioneer of liquid rocket propulsion in the U.S. We're going to run to a quick break. We'll be right back. So go nowhere. Then it's over to you, Tart.
Great. Well, thank you, Charles, for that quick primer about Dr. Robert Goddard. I should point out, just for folks who aren't aware, Robert, it's Robert H. Goddard. H is for Hutchings. and you mentioned he was born in 1882. He died in 1945, just at the end of the of World War II, where we saw liquid fuel rockets used as weapons, I guess, for the first time, and kick off that space race that came after there. And I'm curious about your journey we asked about your journey to space, but your journey to Goddard in particular. Of course, his that historic launch was in March 16th, 1926. We're going to talk a little bit about why that date's important to you in a bit, too, out of Auburn, Massachusetts. And it sounds like you had like a bit of a gravitation towards him that seems somewhat natural. Can you kind of give us an idea of how your interest in space led you to Goddard very personally?
Sure. Well, I think I was 11 years old and bought a book, Giants of Invention, at our local school book fair. And there's Robert Goddard featured on the cover. And I read a little bit about him, but I didn't really didn't think he was going to be so involved in my life. But accidentally, I ended up attending the same university that Goddard went to for his PhD and taught at. So I attended Clark University in 1969, and ultimately was a professor there for a short time before I formed my multimedia production company. But the year I arrived at Clark was the year that Buzz Aldrin came and cut the ribbon at the new library that was dedicated to Robert Goddard. And in the audience was Buzz Aldrin's father, Eugene Aldrin Sr., who was a student and a friend of Goddard's, no less. And Buzz goes off to the moon 2 months later, and he takes a miniature version of Goddard's autobiography with him and wants to leave it on the moon. And NASA says, no, thank you. But he flies back to Worcester when he returns and brings it to Esther Goddard and signs it, and she donates it to Clark. And we hope to display that in the upcoming centennial.
Oh, wow.
So what happened with this house, though, which wasn't part of my radar, I had started a nonprofit a few years ago. I've sort of been known as a wow factor technologist, and I worked on some World's Fair projects and some presidential libraries. And I was basically looking to apply my talents to see what I could do to help inspire more kids. I was devastated to learn the United States was 38th in the world in graduating science and engineering majors. And I just felt like we weren't doing enough to really wow kids. You know, kids are naturally curious, but you need that spark to take them to the next level. So I started this nonprofit, and along the way, I'm really designing what I would consider, immersive environments that would wow me as an 11-year-old and hopefully wow young and old. And I read that Goddard's House was basically on the market and about to be destroyed by a developer.
Ooh.
So that's that kind of got me motivated. Very depressed initially, and 50 years before, when actually Goddard's House was on the market again because Esther had died, the house had been willed to Clark University and WPI, and for whatever reason, they basically declined the sale and auctioned off all the contents of the house and sold the house to a neighbor. So it was in private hands till 1980, I think 1982. I'm sorry, it was sold in 82 and it was private hands until 2021. So I knew it seemed like this was like third time's a charm. And if I didn't step in and find a way to buy it, it was going to be destroyed. And it would just be such a devastating loss to posterity to not have the father of the space age, so to speak, to have his house destroyed by development and building ranch houses on the vacant property. So that's sort of been consuming my life for a while. And after a visit to Kitty Hawk, I read about their centennial in 2003 and started to do the math about 2 years ago and realized, oh my God, Goddard's centennial is coming up in 2026. And that's sort of been keeping me up at night for the last couple of years in terms of how can we leverage that event for the greater good and especially to inspire this younger generation.
So before we get to that, I'd like to talk about the house a little bit more. So what's the current status? You bought it, I assume, through the nonprofit, and you're restoring part of it a museum and then the other part's a residence, or how are you working that?
Yeah, we actually bought it initially as an individual. I didn't tell my wife for 2 weeks because it had to happen in 24 hours.
Oh dear.
I had an astronaut tell me recently I'm the bravest man he knows. And and I am still married, God bless Marsha. So the house has just been recently, just this year, moved into the nonprofit. And we've restored the first floor, and we've been approved for zoning from the city of Worcester as a museum, library, and resource center. The second floor, we're currently renovating and restoring. And our hope is to basically have a science physics student or maybe engineering student from either Clark or WPI live in the house rent-free to come up with some sort of a scholarship, call it our Goddard Fellows program, and basically have them be sort of semi-caretakers for the house, shovel the walks, give tours or visits when I'm not available or my staff isn't available, and we're making some progress. But the house is looking pretty good these days. I think people are very surprised when they arrive there how elegant it looks, and it's come a long way from the disrepair it had fallen into over the years.
And how much of his library or rocket parts, I mean, how much of his stuff do you actually have in the house? Did you have
really very little in the house, just his, certainly his notebooks, a few pieces of ephemera. The good news is when the house was sold, Esther had spent probably the last 15 years of her life organizing all of his papers and notebooks and ephemera and scientific experimentation gear and making sure it went to the right places. So a lot of it's at Clark University, Special Collections, Worcester Polytech, and the Smithsonian. So they really have protected and preserved a lot of Goddard's archives correctly. And we have sort of imitations or digital facsimiles of that.
All right, we're going to go to one more break, and we'll be right back, so go nowhere.
Okay.
Great, Charles. Where we last left off, you were talking about just, your discovery of and desire to protect Goddard's house, and that all. I know that you I guess you live in the house as well.
Nope,
Is that correct?
Nope.
No, you do not. All right. I was trying to figure out when Rod and I were talking about it, how old a house might be, and of course the big question I always get, I always have for those kinds of things. My house is almost 100 years old, is if there are ghosts in it, and I'm just wondering if like what shape? Because you said the house is in good shape. Like what shape is it in now? Like what are your hopes for what kind of a house is it? I suppose to try to paint a picture to the folks that are listening.
Yeah. Sure. It's a 200-year-old Victorian. It'll actually be 200 years old this coming year.
Oh wow.
And it's a Victorian. It sits on an acre of land, and which is sort of unusual for the neighborhood it's in. It used to be actually certainly a larger property. The bones are pretty good. It's got lead paint on the outside. So we've been actually just applied for a grant today for lead paint remediation and repainting. And we're certainly beginning to get a lot of support in terms of historic preservation for There's some knob and tube wiring on one of the floors. There's little plumbing issues, etc. But in general, the bones are pretty good, and we've spent a lot of time in the last couple of years really trying to make it presentable, but also make it safe and more accessible.
If it's 200 years, like as of next year, right,
Yep.
or this year, that means that because the centennial that we're going to be talking about for Robert Goddard, that it was 100 years old when he launched the rocket. I mean, that is crazy. In terms of like history for a house for someone that kind of contributed so much to science there.
Yeah, it's a multi-generational house. So actually, there's a photograph that we can show at some point of young Goddard's, like 8 years old, sitting on the porch with his mother, grandmother, and great-great-grandmother, probably in 1882, 1892. So yeah, something early 1890s, etc. So the house has been in the Goddard family forever, which is
wow,
which is great. It would be I'm so glad we didn't lose it.
So when I come to visit, pertaining to Tarek's ghost comment, I want to walk through the threshold and yell, "You can't make a rocket work in space because there's nothing to push against," and see if I get any feedback. So you said there isn't.
I wonder if is that a challenge for the interns, for the student volunteers?
No,
to spend the night in the Goddard House, right?
Him. Oh, there you go. So you said there wasn't a lot in there, which is always frustrating if you're a de facto museum curator. Do you think there's any chance, are there holdings at the university where he taught or anything else you might get? And second part of that question, do you have any plans to build a reproduction of his first rocket out front?
We actually have a reproduction hanging from the ceiling. We have a wonderful gentleman did a full scale replica of Goddard's first rocket. He called all of his rockets Nell, but this is the original Nell, and there's a great story behind that at some point. But we actually have this wonderful gentleman built us a full-scale replica, and mostly it's out of metal. He's a metal fabricator, but he did use some 3D printing technology, which I'm sure Goddard would have endorsed to do some of the more complicated parts. And he's also the gentleman that's been fabricating all the sculptures for the beginning of the National Space Trail Initiative that's in front of the house at the moment.
I wanted to ask a little bit about that history, though, because it's easy for us to look back. I'm wearing a space shuttle shirt right now about taking like liquid fuel rockets for granted. But this model that you had built, for the house, I saw a version of it at the Smithsonian actually just last month. I took my daughter there to Udvar Hazy for the first time, and there is the life size, the rocket, and it strikes me how such a primitive thing was so revolutionary at the time, and I'm curious what it was about the concept that you've been able to pick up that really set Goddard ahead. Like why he would seize on liquid fuel as opposed to, I guess, the solid fuels that were considered at the time, and then just keep looking further ahead.
Right. Well, he spent years working with solid propellants. Matter of fact, as a student at Worcester Polytech, he blew up the chem lab.
That's right.
To the point they moved him to a standalone magnetics research bunker that had 3-foot walls, so he wouldn't kill anyone. But he tried for years and failed to really achieve what he was looking to do with conventional solid fuel rockets. So he was really looking for alternatives, and at that point, he was interested in hydrogen gas, but it wasn't as easily available in a commercial means. But there was liquid oxygen available through a local supplier. So he basically used liquid oxygen, sometimes kerosene, sometimes gasoline. And when you think about it, his rockets, as primitive as they were basically bombs on a stick.
I was just thinking about that. It's so scary.
Yeah. And the way his assistants lit it is they had a blowtorch on the end of a stick, and they pressurized the liquid oxygen and the gasoline, and it ran up the tubes, and he kind of stuck it near where they were atomized and ran away. So, no wonder most of his rockets blew up.
Wow, this is like all those old Bugs Bunny cartoons where they have to run out to the bottom of the V2 looking rocket and light a little stick of dynamite there.
Right.
So when I look at your website, the Wonder Mission seems to be the umbrella for what you're doing. Can you tell us what that is and what it means?
Sure. I mean, the idea of the Wonder Mission really is to bring the universe to Main Street, to find ways and initiatives that really can inspire people to the awe and wonder of space, and really kind of raise the bar in experiences. That's my background, is really creating these very high resolution canvases that I found when resolution gets past a certain threshold, that's when seeing becomes believing and the magic happens. So initially it was really started to create some of these things, really the personification of the holodeck, or my friend Frank White's The Overview Experience. We're really trying to create ideally a billion pixel immersive display that allows people to feel like they're experiencing what the overview effect does, and also really display all these images and data we have from the Mars data sets and the Jupiter Juno mission data sets at a scale and a resolution people haven't seen before. And the Goddard project is really just kind of one of our many initiatives that just seems so appropriate, and the Goddard story is so wonderfully inspiring that we'd love it to be kind of embodied into every school kid's vocabulary. The George Washington has the cherry tree story. We have this wonderful Goddard cherry tree story where he's inspired, at 17 years old and looks up at Mars and comes down from the tree saying, I'm a different boy because I found my purpose in life, which is to find a way to go to Mars and beyond.
Well, let's.
You and I are waiting for each other to
Yeah,
talk.
no. Well, I want to talk about, because you mentioned we're 300 plus days out from that centennial, and I'm curious what you hope people will be able to take away if they're able to come in person, or if they follow the Wonder Mission online, or if there's other ways to get involved in both the history and the legacy, of this American scientist, and what you were hoping, how you hope to get that message out too, I guess, in the year to come.
Sure. So we've been very grassroots. It's just this very small, unfunded group of volunteers, et cetera. We're sometimes called the Paul Revere's of the Centennial. We've been running around for the last couple of years at various aerospace conferences, kind of the Centennial's coming. But if Paul Revere came 1,000 days before the British showed up, they'd probably tell him to go away and come back, in a few years. But ideally, we think the Space Centennial is this incredible opportunity not only to celebrate Goddard's historic legacy, but I think more importantly, and especially nowadays where science is under attack almost every day, really trying to leverage the centennial to celebrate what we're calling today's Goddards. Let's celebrate all our scientists and engineers who are working tirelessly and doing amazing things, inventing vaccines in a year or flying helicopters on Mars without atmosphere. But we really don't celebrate them. We celebrate our Kardashians and our sports heroes. So we think that the centennial should really celebrate today's Goddards all over the country, that every institution, every aerospace company, schools and universities should use the centennial to celebrate big dreamers. And that's really what Goddard's about, just the ability to dream big and envision possibilities that no one else could imagine. And as importantly, we need to celebrate and elevate our tomorrow's Goddards, these wonderful, brilliant students that we see at the NSS conferences, et cetera, who are doing amazing things, and brilliant, smart, attentive kids who kind of get sidelined as, they're smart, nerdy kids, et cetera, but we don't celebrate or elevate them. And we think the Centennial's a great chance to do that.
John, what was that?
What was that?
Sorry, my alarm sound was...
That's right. That time it wasn't me.
Well, this is our way of celebrating what you're doing. And to further celebrate, we're going to go to a break and then come back and talk about the National Space Trail. So everybody stand by.
Awesome.
So, Charles, can you tell us what is the National Space Trail? That sounds really interesting.
Sure. So years ago, I had produced the official video for the Boston Freedom Trail, and it was very successful because you could take people efficiently through all the locations of the Freedom Trail and actually go behind the scenes. And as we started to look at all the sites around the Worcester area that were significant to the development of the space age, and we started to kind of map them out, we started to come up with this idea of a space trail. And once we kind of started to really ideate on that, we said, well, why stop as a Worcester or regional space trail? Let's have a national space trail they'll start in Worcester, go statewide through all the institutions in Massachusetts that were significant, MITs, et cetera, and then move around the country to all the sites that were significant not only to the history of space, but the continuation of space exploration, and also in terms of science and space inspiration, so planetariums and science centers. And we've basically got funding for the first 8 or 9 here in Worcester, so it'll take you from the Goddard House to Goddards High School. And Goddard was inspired by these 2 unbelievable teachers at the Old South High School in Worcester, Mass, Dr. Calvin Andrews and Miss Fields, and really speaks about the power of how much a teacher's influence can have on a young, smart kid. And moving on to WPI and Clark University and the launch site, et cetera. But it's garnered a lot of interest, and we came up with kind of an elegant design, an elegant sculpture. One of the things we're hoping to do is as we start to finish up the Worcester segment, which will be done in the next 3 or 4 months, is to really kind of do a survey and ask people at our various aerospace conferences what sites around the country should be included in a national space trail. And the hope would be that these sites would want to be included, and I'm sure we need to form a larger organization to manage that and organize it, et cetera. But we have a simple website that's online right now, just nationalspacetrail.org, that has some simple content that we've put on there, and eventually it's going to grow. But I think hopefully it'll become something much bigger than ourselves, and it'll be embraced nationally. But it's a cool thing, and everyone that comes to the house, the first thing they do is they do a selfie with the Robert Goddard cutout silhouette and the space trail marker in front of the house.
Well, it's going to be a long walk on that trail from Houston through the desolation of White Sands, New Mexico, to Jet Propulsion Laboratory, but we'll do it.
Yeah.
Are you going to walk all the way to Florida too, on the way back all the way up to?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I started off with like 50 sites, and then very quickly I realized there's probably 150 sites that are really significant, places I never knew about. So anyhow, it's a really fun project, and it's sort of growing exponentially and getting a lot of buzz. So we're enjoying that.
That sounds exciting. And something you can check off over time. If you're a space buff. I'm curious about people who can't get to the house. I had heard, or Rod and I had heard that you're looking at like a virtual museum for Goddard to give people that option of learning more about Goddard and his life, etc., even if they're not able to make the trip to the house itself. And can you tell us a little bit about that and what you're hoping people will be able to get out of that experience?
Right. I think that's certainly that's the next phase, and some of that information will be on the National Space Trail site with links to all the supplementary rich multimedia that's available for Goddard. There's this incredible documentary that George Lucas did in 2007 that I don't think anyone's ever seen, but anyone that we share it with becomes very inspired, and it's like, I didn't realize how significant Goddard was. Matter of fact, Dr. Alan Stern, who Rod introduced me to at NSS last year, and I actually had no idea who Dr. Stern was at the time. He and I kept in touch a little bit, and I shared that link to the Lucasfilm documentary, and he called me back within weeks and has volunteered to be a guardian angel and spreading the word to aerospace leaderships in terms of the Goddard Centennial and some of our initiatives. So
that's how you and I first got in contact, Charles, was through Alan. He called me and we talked about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I call and email people all the time. Nothing. Alan sends one email, and the next thing you know, the head of the Goddard Space Flight Center calls you back. So it's terrific. And the Alan Stearns of the world. Those are my rock stars. If Mick Jagger came to my house, I'd certainly be very polite and interested. But these guys, they're my rocket stars, and I want kids to feel like all these brilliant engineers and scientists and explorers really should be the heroes we look up to.
It's interesting to be our age and still, at least in my case, I wrote a book about 10 years ago about curiosity. I spent the better part of a year shadowing the chief scientist on that mission around, a guy named John Grotzinger. And I felt like I was about 5 sitting at the feet of my really cool uncle who was doing all this amazing stuff. Yeah. Said uncle worked at Lawrence Livermore, but John was much more interesting and more fun than said uncle was. But it's weird to be a senior citizen and sort of be fanboying about these guys, but I can't help it. They're cool and they have very impressive minds.
Didn't you go out into the desert with John?
Tarek and I can only admire. Yes, I went out to Death Valley on a let's talk about the geology of Mars trip. Mike Wall was there.
That's right.
And Mike had to drop back from the group and help me up a particularly rough part of climbing because I was about 40 pounds heavier than I am now and chugging along with a very heavy steel tripod and a camera and a backpack and everything else. And it was not fun. The best part, though, was this is kind of a charming part about John Grotzinger. We'd get to a particular spot and he'd say, now over here, you could see we've got stromatolites in this mat from glacial recession, blah, 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 blah. Of course, you'd never see that on Mars. Anyway, moving on to the next thing. And he did that about 3 times. I'm like, oh, why am I here? Anyway, sorry, I had a big diversion for us there. Tarek, I think it's your turn.
Yeah,
right?
I did. Yeah, I had a question because you mentioned just now, Charles, about how, the director of the Goddard Space Flight Center, gave you a ring. Which leads me to Goddard's legacy in U.S. space exploration, like in modern day, because we have this Goddard Space Flight Center named after him. They handle lots of really amazing things, space telescopes, etc. And I'm wondering, even if the public may not be as aware of his contributions as you're hoping that to educate them on with the centers. If you feel that there is already an appreciation of the impact through that, they named the Greenbelt Goddard Space Flight Center after him. Although I know that there's some trepidation. I don't know if we want to get into it too much about the discussions on closing NASA centers, et cetera. But do you feel that is like an arrival for Goddard in the industry, at least, to have a center named after him as an icon in U.S. rocketry history, or is it still in peril, that legacy?
I think it's terribly in peril. It's in our small world of like-minded space evangelists who believe in space and love space and see all the potential. His name is fairly common, but outside of that, there's really no recognition. I travel around the country and ask young people and old people all the time who Robert Goddard is. I see kids wearing NASA t-shirts, and even in Worcester, even in Massachusetts, most people are clueless. There's actually a whole montage in the Lucasfilm documentary is who is Robert Goddard, and every kid says, and every adult says, I don't know. So also there's a great opportunity in this untold story. And there's this great opportunity in the untold story of Esther Goddard, his wife, who was really significant in his research efforts and photographed and filmed every launch every day.
Huh.
And, she sewed the parachute. She put out the brush fires when the rockets blew up. She typed up his notes every day because no one else could read them. And when he died, she's the one who organized his papers and fought for the rights to his patents that NASA was still using at that time. And in 1960, she won $1 million.
Oh, wow.
As payment for Goddard's rights, but also really to promote his legacy. But in general, it's a really unknown story. And with that is also great opportunity. It's wonderful when people can discover something they didn't know, who knew? Who knew that the Webb telescope was constructed at the Goddard Space Flight Center named after Robert Goddard?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask about that relationship with NASA too. Like, as we mentioned, he died in 45, and of course NASA comes a bit later, but that's the foundation that a lot of the science was based on. What was that relationship in terms of discovering his work, building off the work, or is it just like that it was a foundation layer, or was Esther involved in a lot of the, I don't know if it was licensing or whatnot for that kind of thing?
I mean that came much later, and a lot of the patents were issued, had been filed, but were issued really after his death.
Yeah.
So he really kind of fell off the radar. I mean, his last experiments were working with JATO rockets for large seaplanes when it was down in Maryland for a little bit. But there's a big disconnect with how significant Goddard's achievements were, whether in fact the Germans were actually using his patents and his theories to advance their program. But he really fell off, and the military really didn't pay much attention to him. That was one of his frustrations. He went to the military very early in World War II, and he was dismissed most of the time as being impractical or having no interest. It's sort of like same way with the Wright brothers. It took 4 years after the Wright brothers before the French saw what they were up to and kind of popularized it and brought it back to America as heroes. But there's a lot of tragedy with Goddard's story. He wasn't a perfect person. He was very secretive, maybe because he was lambasted by places like the New York Times. He didn't share, and yet he was a lovable, likable guy with lots of interest in painting and playing the piano. But in some ways, it's a bit of a tragic story. When you think about how amazing he was and what a visionary he was, and no one really paid any attention, and he really fought for funds and acknowledgement for most of his life.
I think there are stories, right, about von Braun and others like reading his research and building off of them. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Well, and von Braun was just fortunate that he had, besides the history in Germany, good and bad, he had the personality and the good looks to really pull it off, which is something, Tarek, that you and I have to master.
I beg to differ, my friend. So
yeah, I know. I talked to your mom today too. So Charles, maybe we can close on what your needs are for this project. Sure. What are you looking to need?
I think success for us is to kind of inspire companies, municipalities, schools, science centers around the country to kind of use the centennial and leverage centennial in their own unique and creative ways for their own purposes. We really wanted to create more of a national movement. The beauty of also, being older these days and being a nonprofit, there's not much ego anymore in terms of getting credit or who did what first, but we'd love everyone around the country to find ways to leverage the centennial. And centennial, I think, is something that can happen every year, really for the greater good, but especially we have to work much harder to inspire our kids. We've got a big workforce development problem. I talked with the president of Estes Rocket Company on one of these AIAA calls that Alan helped organize, and they're going to build a Goddard rocket in advance of the centennial.
Oh, cool.
Oh, nice.
But wouldn't it be great to have every school around the country or rocket club fire off a rocket on March 16th at around 2:30 p.m. at the same time? But I think there's so many different ways of kind of leveraging the Goddard centennial, but also having all these institutions and organizations celebrate their own today's and tomorrow's Goddards. They're all out there and they're doing great stuff. And, we saw like these 300 students at NSS last year at ISDC, with their poster papers and their research. They are tomorrow's Goddards. And we really need to find ways to elevate and inspire tens of thousands of more with the wonder and power and possibilities and hope of space.
Well, Charles, I want to thank you very much for joining us today for episode 160 of the podcast that we like to call The Amazing Dr. Goddard. Which website is best for people to keep track of what you're trying to do here?
I think the wondermission.org is pretty good. We need to update it because we're moving too fast. and the nationalspacetrail.org for sure. And
fabulous.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Spread the word. I think there's so many people that can take advantage of the centennial opportunity. I saw what they did for the Wright brothers centennial with tens of thousands of people, and really inspired a lot of young aviation folks. So hopefully we'll live up to the challenge and do the best we can to get everyone fired up about the centennial.
Great. And Tarek, where can we track you playing Rocketeer these days?
Well, you can find me at space.com as always, on the Twitter and the Blue Sky, etc. at Tarek J. Malik. And this weekend, I will actually be walking the Freedom Trail, Charles. So I'll be thinking of you on a trip up to Boston to go to the PAX East video game convention. It's going to be fun and a bun to look at all the space games there.
Awesome.
Fun in a bun. Okay. And of course, you can find me at pilebooks.com or at astromagazine.com, where I tend to hang out. Remember, you can always drop us a line at twit@twit.tv. We do answer every email, and we love to get your comments, suggestions, and ideas, especially when they're positive ones. New episodes of this podcast published every Friday on your favorite podcatcher, so make sure to subscribe, like, tell your friends, give us reviews, give us your love. We always need it, and you can head to our website at twit.tv/TWIS. Now, don't forget, we and the Twit Network are counting on you to step up and be counted to join Club Twit. It's only $7 a month. And I asked the room, what can you get that's more fun than what we just did for $7 a month? I can't think of anything.
Crickets.
Yeah, you can't even get crickets. Although I've got a good cricket story to tell one of these days. I did something wicked with crickets once. But it'll help keep us on the air, bringing you great guests and horrid space jokes. So, hey, join the club. And they are now back to also offering annual subscriptions instead of monthly. So you're all set there. So, hey, stick with us because we love you and we can use your love. You can also follow the Twit Tech Podcast Network. You'd think on episode 160 I'd get through that in one piece. Twit Tech Podcast Network at Twit on Twitter, and on Facebook at twit.tv, on Instagram. Gentlemen, thank you. And Charles, I hope I'll see you at ISDC in about 5 weeks.
Me too.
Will do. Thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah. Thank you.
Stay on top of tech trends without the time sink. Twit.tv's short-form podcasts are built for busy leaders like you, delivering essential insights in minutes. Hands-on Mac and Hands-on Windows provide quick tips for Mac and PC, while Hands-on Tech quickly addresses common tech challenges to keep your operations running smoothly. If your conference room needs an upgrade, Home Theater Geeks explores the best screen and sound systems. And if you like watching the shows, join Club Twit to get full video access, ad-free versions, and more. Get tech knowledge that matters on your schedule. Download our short format shows now at twit.tv or your favorite podcast player.